everyone, this is Rosie, and today I'll be showing you how to construct my Baby Makes 3 pattern, which is a set of 3 nested round bottom baskets. So let's get started. Here is the PDF pattern that you can purchase if you'd like to make the baskets, and you will find a link below the video to purchase the PDF pattern. Now, first off, I want to say that there are no written instructions within this pattern to construct the baskets, but this video will serve as a step-by-step tutorial for the construction. What you will find within this pattern are your fabric requirements, your interfacing requirements, the templates for cutting out the round bottoms, and all the cutting charts that you need to cut out your pattern pieces. Here is the set of nesting baskets. The smallest basket is 4.5 inches in diameter and it's 3 inches high. The medium-sized basket is 6 inches in diameter and it's 4 inches high. And the largest one is 7.5 inches in diameter and it's 5 inches high. To make these baskets, I used 3 half-yard cuts of fabric, which I have right here. And the first thing I needed to do was decide what fabric I wanted on the outside of which basket. So I decided that I was going to use this fabric here for my largest basket, so that is going to be on the outer side of my large basket. I chose the zebra fabric to be on the outside of the medium-sized basket, and I chose this geometric fabric to be on the outside of the smaller basket. And each one of these fabrics are in each basket. So on the larger basket, I have this fabric here on the outside, and then it appears on the inside of the medium-sized basket, and then it's on the lining and the bottom of the smaller basket. The zebra fabric is in the bottom of the large basket and on the binding. It's on the outer side of the medium-sized basket, and it's on the inside of the small basket. And then the geometric fabric is on the inside of the large basket. It's on the bottom and the binding of the medium-sized basket, and it's on the outside of the smaller basket. So you need to choose 3 different fabrics and decide which fabric is going to be on the outside of the basket. So since this is on the outside of my largest basket, this is called fabric 1. This one is on the outside of the medium basket. This is fabric number 2. And this fabric is on the outside of the smaller basket. So this is fabric number 3. The reason why I'm saying this is because I have some cutting and layout charts that will help you cut out all of your pieces very easily. You don't have to figure out what you have to cut for each basket. It's all been determined for you, and those cutting and layout charts are in the PDF file. Here is the fabric cutting and layout chart. And there are 3 of them, so you have one for fabric 1, 2, and 3. Now up here on this one it says fabric 1 cutting layout, and to use this chart for the outer fabric of the 7.5 inch basket. And then you see the layout of all your pieces. So this would be your half-yard cut of fabric. These are the selvages, and you want to cut everything out according to the layout on this chart, because that's going to give you the most efficient use of your fabric. And it tells you what each piece is going to be. So this piece down here is going to be for the outer side of the 7.5 inch basket. This will be for the inner side of the 6 inch basket, and this will be for the binding of the 4.5 inch basket. And then you have your circles over here. Now when you print out these charts from the PDF pattern, you will have all of your exact cutting measurements listed in here as well. So since this is fabric number 1, which is for the 7.5 inch basket, I'm just going to take my fabric 1 and put it with that chart right there, so I know that that's the cutting chart for that fabric. Then I have the fabric 2 cutting layout, so I'm going to put my fabric number 2 with this chart. And then this is the fabric 3 cutting layout, so I'll put my number 3 fabric with this chart. Once I have everything sorted, then I can go ahead and start cutting out my pieces. Now for the interfacings, there is a cutting chart within the PDF pattern that tells you what you need to cut out for all of the interfacings, and you'll just follow those instructions. If you don't want to use these charts for cutting your fabrics and you want to use your own fabrics in your own combinations, there's also an alternate cutting chart in the PDF pattern that you can use, and it gives you the exact measurements for each basket. So there'll be measurements for the 6-inch basket, the 7.5-inch basket, and the 4.5-inch basket. And you can go ahead and use that instead of these charts here. And using the alternate chart is actually a nice way of using up all of your scraps. Inside your PDF pattern, you'll find templates for all the circles that you'll need to make all 3 baskets. I made them as half circles to cut down on the amount of paper that you're going to print out. Now when you cut these out, you want to cut right on the outside edge of the black line on all the circles. And something you really want to take note of after you print is to measure this test square. When you go to print, make sure that your printer is set to print out these templates at 100% or actual size. After they've printed, you'll go ahead and measure this 2-inch test square. You want to measure from side to side and from top to bottom. And you're going to be measuring from the outside of the line. And if it measures 2 inches in each direction, then you know that your templates have printed out correctly. Another way, if you want to double check, is you can measure the diameter of each one of these circles. So this is an 8.5-inch circle. This diameter should measure 8.5 inches. Now to use the templates, you'll simply take the template, put it down on your fabric or your interfacings. You'll trace right along that diameter there, along the curve of the circle, and then you'll just flip it over. Match this diameter with the diameter that you just drew, and you'll trace around the other side of the circle. I want to give you a tip for cutting out your fabric circles. Now each basket has 4 fabric circles for the bottom of the basket, and each one of those fabric circles needs to be interfaced with the Pellon SF101. So what I like to do is take my cutting chart, and first I'll cut out the 3 rectangular pieces that need to be cut for the basket. And once I'm done cutting those out, I figure out how much fabric I need to accommodate all 4 circles. And then I'll cut that piece of fabric out accordingly. And in addition to cutting out the fabric, I also cut out a piece of the SF101, and I fuse it to the back of that fabric. Then I draw in all of my circles, so I have 3 of them drawn here. And then I'll draw in the 4th circle right now. And then I can cut both the fabric and the woven interfacing at the same time. This eliminates the need to have to cut out 4 fabric circles and 4 woven interfacing circles for each basket. I have all my pieces cut out, including all of my interfacing pieces, and now I just want to sort all of these pieces by basket size. So you should have 1 fleece circle for each size basket. And again, all of your cutting measurements will be in the cutting charts. Then I have a Peltex circle for each size basket. And I have a piece of foam, which will be for the sides of the basket. And I have 1 piece for each size basket. Then I have my fabric 1 pieces. So these circles here will be for the smallest basket, and all the circles were pre-fused with the SF101 before I cut them out. So that's for the smaller basket. And this also is the binding for the smaller basket. This piece here will be for the inner side of the medium-sized basket. And this piece is for the outer size of the larger basket. Then I have all of my number 2 fabrics. So I have the circles for the larger basket. And I have the binding for the larger basket. And this is going to be the inner side of the smaller basket. And this will be the outer size of the medium basket. Then for my fabric number 3, I have the circles for the medium basket. And I also have the binding for the medium basket. And then this is the outer side of the smaller basket, and this is the inner size of the larger basket. So now each one of these piles are all the pieces that you need for your basket. So this is everything you need for the 7.5-inch basket, this is what you need for the 6-inch basket, and this is what you need for the 4.5-inch basket. And now we can actually start our construction. I'm going to start constructing the basket, and I will be demonstrating with the 6-inch finished basket. Now the construction for the 7.5-inch and the 4.5-inch is exactly the same, but I'm only going to be demonstrating with the 6-inch basket. Now one of the reasons why I'm doing that is because the fabric here is lighter and it will be much easier for you to see my markings. So you want to start with the fabric that's going to be on the outer edge, and you want to turn it over. And you want to mark in 1/2 inch from each side edge there. So I just simply took my ruler and I lined it up with the 1/2 inch marking on the edge, and I marked it. Now you want to use something that will be removable. I'm using a friction pen, and even though this ink comes off with heat, it will come back with cold. So this is only demonstration purposes. You need to use something that will erase easily. Now once you have those markings in there, you want to flip it over to the right side. I'm going to turn it this way, and I'm going to start marking some quilting lines. Now you can quilt this however you desire, but you do not want to quilt past these red lines here on the back. This is your seam allowance, which is 1/2 inch. So my first line that I'm going to mark in is going to be 1.5 inches from that side edge. And from there, I'm going to mark each line 1 inch away from the previous line. And I'll keep marking until I get close to the center. Now that I'm somewhere near the center, I'm going to flip this around, and I'm going to mark 1.5 inches from this side edge. And from here, each line I mark will be 1 inch away from the previous line. Again, you can quilt this however you like. I like the vertical lines. You could do horizontal lines. You could do just a free-form quilting if you want. It's totally up to you. As those marks move towards, as my lines move towards the center, I'm going to get to a point where I have a space that's not large enough to fit in 2 1-inch spaces. So what I'm going to do is measure between this line and this line. That's about 1.5 inches. So I'm just going to make the space here 3/4 inch. I'm taking that 1.5 inch space and dividing it by 2. So that's 3/4. And once everything is all quilted and put together, you're not really going to notice that that these 2 spaces are smaller than the rest of the spaces. Next, you want to take your piece of foam, and we're going to clip the exterior fabric to the foam. You want to start at one end and make sure that the edge of the foam is lining up with the red line, that 1/2 inch line that we drew in on the wrong side of the fabric, just like this. And you'll put a clip in. You could put a clip in the bottom too. Just like this. And then we'll do the same thing at this end. We're going to line the edge of the foam with that red line. And once you have these clips in place, we're going to turn this over to the right side, and we're going to put clips all along the top here, and you want the edge of your fabric to be right up against the edge of your foam there. You don't need a ton of them, just enough to hold everything in place. After you have that clipped, you're going to take the piece that's going to be on the interior side of the basket, and you're going to clip that to the other side of the foam. You want to make sure that the edge of your fabric is even with the edge of the fabric on the other side of the foam. So put those edges together evenly and then reclip everything. Do the same thing on this side. Make sure those edges are nice and even, and then reclip. And then you're going to clip all along the length again, making sure that the edge of your fabric is even with the edge of your foam. And then the other thing that I like to do is just double check to make sure that these edges here are even. And then I clip the two side pieces together, the two side edges together, just to make sure that everything stays where it needs to be while I'm doing my quilting. And I do that on both ends. And then if you like, you can also go ahead and clip the bottom edges of the panels together as well. And that will just hold everything together nicely, and it will avoid having your layers shift as you're quilting everything. So I just like to put in a few more clips along the bottom edge. Now, when you quilt this, we're going to quilt from the outside of the basket, which for this one is from the zebra side. And I like to start by having one quilted line right here at the edge and one here. And that just kind of locks everything into place. And by the time I get to the other end, I won't have fabric shifting where it's not supposed to be. So you'll go ahead over to the sewing machine and stitch this line and this line first. And then once those are stitched into place, you can start stitching the rest of the lines. And you will back stitch at both ends. You'll start at the top and you'll go all the way to the bottom. I'm all set to start quilting on those vertical lines, and I am sewing on a Juki TL 2010Q, and I'm at a stitch length of 3.0. And the first line I'm stitching is the line that we drew 1.5 inches away from the side edge, and back stitch at both ends. Now I've scooted all the way over to the opposite end, and I'm going to stitch on this line that's 1.5 inches in from the edge here. And same thing, back stitch at both ends. And now that we've done that, we can go ahead and start stitching on the other lines. I like to start in the middle and work my way out towards the outer edge. And always back stitch at the beginning and end of the line. So just keep going until you've stitched on all of those quilting lines. Now that all of the quilting is done, you want to fold the entire piece together, and you want to make sure that the fabric on the inside of the basket is folded back, and then you're going to bring the two edges, the two side edges of the outer fabric together and clip them in place. And I also like to clip that inner fabric back too, just to make sure that it doesn't get underneath my sewing needle when I'm sewing. And now the edges of the foam should be even with each other. And at the sewing machine, you're going to sew right on that red line and make sure that you don't catch the foam. So the foam should be free. You can pull it back too if you want to, but you're just sewing right on that red line there without catching the foam. So now I'm going to sew on that red line, and I've pulled everything out of the way. So I've pulled the fabric on the interior of the basket out of the way and the foam out of the way on both sides. And I'm just stitching with a stitch length of 2.5. Now that that seam is sewn, you want to open everything up this way. So here's the seam that we just sewed right there. You want to have that tucked underneath the foam, and your two foam edges should be coming together. Just like that. They should not be overlapping, they should just be coming together like that. And then you'll take one side and push it all the way back. And then this side right here, you're going to fold it over, and you want to turn under the edge like maybe 1/4 of an inch. Just like that. And we're going to take some double-sided tape. You can use double-sided tape or some fusible web, whatever you have on hand or whatever you prefer to use. And right where we folded that edge, I'm going to put the double-sided tape. Just like that. After you have your double-sided stick tape down or your glue, whatever, you want to fold this over this way. And the folded edge right here should extend past the seam that we just sewed. So this is the exterior. This is where we sewed those two exterior side ends together. You want that fold, this fold right here, to extend past that seam. Then once you have everything stuck down in place, you're going to stitch right in the ditch where that seam is, and that's going to sew this fold in place. So I have that fold adhered with the sticky tape right now, and I'm going to go over to the machine and stitch in the ditch right here. And that will actually serve as another quilting line between this line and this line here. So I'm going to stitch in the ditch right now, and you're just going to pull everything back here and try and stay right in that ditch. And I'm stitching with a stitch length of 3.0. Back stitch at both ends. And now we're at the bottom of that seam, and I'm going to backstitch. And you can see right over here that I caught that fold in my stitching. Next, you'll take the binding for your basket, and you want to join the side edges together and sew across the side edge with a 1/2 inch seam. And I'm going to do that off camera. I'll use a stitch length of 2.0. Now that I have that 1/2 inch seam sewn, I'm going to bring my basket back in here, and I want to clip this binding to the top edge of the basket from the outside of the basket. You do want to open up the seam, and you'll clip it all around, and it should fit in perfectly. Make sure that the top edge of the binding is at the top edge of the basket, and make sure that you're pinning it to the foam side, not from this side here. This side does not have any foam in it. And that will be the bottom of our basket. Once you have this clipped into place, we're going to sew it with a stitch length of about 2.5, and we'll stitch from the inside of the basket. I have the basket in place now, and I'll be stitching around with a stitch length of 2.5. I am stitching from the inside of the basket, and my seam allowance will be 1/2 of an inch. Now you can back stitch at the beginning if you want to. It doesn't really matter because we're going to end at the same spot. So if you don't back stitch, it's no big deal. When you get to where the binding seam is, just make sure that it stays open so that you don't get any bulges there. And now I'm getting back to where I started from, so you can stitch over your beginning stitches a little bit and end it. Now we're going to work on the circles for the bottom of the basket. One will have Peltex on it, and the other one is just going to have the fusible fleece on it. What I like to do is mark in 1/2 of an inch on 4 sides. So really it's like 4/4 because they're circles. And this is just going to be to give me some guidelines for placing my fleece and my Peltex before I fuse them down. Once it's all marked, you can take the fleece and place it down within those red marks. That's going to ensure that you have your nice 1/2 inch seam all the way around. And then you can do the same thing with the Peltex. So you'll place that down within the red marks. And then you just want to go over to your iron and fuse both of these down according to the manufacturer's instructions. And I'm going to do mine off camera. So here are the circles now. This one's the fleece, this one is the Peltex. The piece with the fleece, I want to take another circle and I'm going to clip these wrong sides together. And once it's all clipped, we're going to go over to the sewing machine and sew completely around this circle about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. And this is going to be the circle that gets sewn into the bottom of the basket. Now, for the fleece side, you can see my fleece shifted a little bit, but that's okay because what we want to do is take the other circle, and for these ones we're going to pin them right sides together, just like this. And we're going to sew about 2/3 or 3/4 of the way around, and we want to leave a little opening. And the reason why I'm not worried that this is shifted is because after everything is sewn together, we're going to pull these edges back and we're going to do a little bit of hand stitching. So just so you can see where I'm sewing, I'm just going to mark with a red line, and hopefully that will make it a little bit easier for you to see. And when I sew, I'll be sewing right on the edge of this Peltex, so I want my needle to fall right where that red line is. So I'll finish clipping these together and we'll go and sew these 2 circles. First I'm sewing the circle with the Peltex in it, and again I want my needle to ride right on that red line there. And I'm sewing with a stitch length of 2.5, and you do want to back stitch at both ends on this. And then I'll just follow this all the way around until I get to the point where I ended that red line. Try not to sew over the Peltex. Okay, now that I'm done with that one, I'll sew the one with the fleece in it, and this is the one where the wrong sides of the circle are together. And just sew about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. You don't need to backstitch on this one. I'm using a stitch length of 2.5 again. I have the two circles sewn together, and what I like to do with the one with the Peltex is where I ended that seam there, I'm just going to clip in just a little bit, not too much. And then I like to take a pair of pinking shears, and I want to cut between those two clips, so all around the area where I sewed. Now if you don't have pinking shears, what you'll do is take your scissors and just go ahead and make a series of clips all the way around this area here. The pinking shears are very nice to use, and it's something that we don't really use too much anymore in sewing. Just be careful that you don't clip into your stitching. And then once you're done clipping all the way around, you're just going to go ahead and turn this right side out. After you have it turned, just work that curve out nicely, and it should fall right into place because of that Peltex in there. But right now we're going to put this aside, and we're going to take the circle that has the fleece in it, and we want to mark the quarter marks on it. So fold it in half with all the edges together, make a little V-shaped clip. You don't want to go past your seam allowance with this, so make them small. Then you'll take the two V-clips, put those together, and then you're going to clip at the other quarter marks. After you're done finding the quarter marks on the circle, you'll take your basket. You want to turn it so the exterior is on the inside, and you're going to do the same thing. You're going to find your quarter marks here. So just fold it in half, make a clip, make another clip at the other end, and again you want to stay within your 1/2 inch seam allowances. Then line those clips up and go out to the edge here and make some more quarter marks. Then you're going to take the circle and you're going to clip the circle to the bottom of the basket, and the first thing that you'll do is match up those quarter marks. And everything has been measured out for you precisely. All the math has been taken out. This should fall right into place. It is very important to sew precisely and to cut precisely. And as long as you do that, you shouldn't have any trouble setting in the circle. So once all of the quarter marks are clipped into place, you're just going to push the circle down in there and ease it in. And you'll clip all around. You can use a lot of clips if you like. Use as many as you need to make yourself feel comfortable. And clip 1/4 section at a time. Once this is all clipped into place, I just lost my quarter mark here. Once this is all clipped into place, we will sew with a 1/2 inch seam all the way around, and we're sewing from the circle side. So I'm going to finish clipping this and then we'll sew it down. You can see how it's just fitting right in there, just as it should. I have the circle clipped into the bottom, and now we're ready to sew. I'll be sewing the bottom in with a seam allowance of 1/2 inch and a stitch length of 2.5. And you can go ahead and back stitch at the beginning. Just try and keep all of your edges together. So the edge of the circle with the bottom of the edge of the basket. And as you go around, you're going to move everything so that it stays flat against the bed of the machine. Just keep readjusting whenever you need to. When you get back to the beginning, just sew over those beginning stitches and back stitch. After I have the bottom all sewn in, I just like to go ahead and trim the seam allowance down to 1/4 of an inch. Not more, just 1/4 of an inch. Now that I have that seam trimmed down, I want to get my binding into place and get it ready to sew. So I'm just going to pull it straight up out of the basket. I want to take this edge right here, this long edge of the binding, fold it down to where the top of the basket ends, so right where that foam is, and then fold it down again. And I want to get that fold to be slightly underneath that line of stitching. And that's the line of stitching that we stitched the binding in with. Now my preferred method is to sew this down by hand. If you want to sew it by the machine, you can certainly do that, but if you do, make sure that your folded edge is going slightly below that line of stitching. If it's not, you're going to have areas of your binding that's caught by the stitching and areas where it's not. And another thing that you can do is get some fusible web, and you would adhere it right above this stitching line. So you'd adhere it right here. And they do sell it in different widths. I can't off the top of my head think of what the widths are, but certainly not more than 1 inch. And then you would just fuse it down, you'd clip your binding in place, and then you'd go over to the iron and fuse everything together. So those are a couple of options for the binding. But as I said, I prefer hand stitching. So I'm going to finish clipping this all along here, and then I will go ahead and hand stitch this down off camera. To hand stitch the binding, I take my needle and I just put it slightly underneath that binding, and then I just take a small bite out of the binding and I pull my needle through, and I do that all the way around the basket. Here's the circle that has the Peltex in it. So to close this opening, I fold the edge of the circle under, following the contour of the circle, and then I press it down. And then after I have it all pressed in place, I take this side and I fold it over the Peltex, and I let these edges meet each other, these folded edges meet each other, and clip it. Once I have everything clipped into place, I just simply go and hand stitch this opening closed. And this is how I sew the opening closed. I just take a little bite out of each fold and pull my needle through. And I do that across the entire opening. I finished sewing closed the opening for the Peltex circle, and now I can just place it in the bottom of the basket. It will cover over that raw seam down there and holds in very, very nicely with friction. It's really not going to come out. If you wanted, you could probably run a little bit of fabric glue right along that edge where the raw edges and then press this down in here, but I personally don't think it's needed. So there you go. Here's the basket all completed, and you will complete the other two exactly the same way. Well, I really do hope that you've enjoyed watching this video. I've certainly enjoyed bringing it to you, and I do hope that you'll give the pattern a try. And I sincerely thank everyone who has liked my videos and subscribed to my channel. Thank you for watching.